We're in a series called Supernaturally Natural, and we've been going through the book of Acts. And today I'm actually going to deviate from the book of Acts. It's still part of our series. But I want to tell a story that's in a different part of the Bible that just really has jumped out to me in the last couple weeks. And mainly it's jumped out to me from my own experience and the experience of other people that I've been walking with. Because there's a lot of people I know right now that are facing incredible trials. They've got things coming up from behind. They've got things coming from before. People that have situations with their jobs or with not having a job or losing a job. People that are getting foreclosed on their house, trying to figure out how to come up with ways to save that. There's people that are, in the middle of all kinds of business deals that are going south, and they have just things that seem impossible to work out. Other people that are having personal struggles with their kids. There's just a lot. There's a lot of weight. And sometimes what happens when we face these obstacles, either things that from our past that are coming after us, like I met with a couple this week that is just struggling with their relationship from addictions and things that they both experienced and mistakes they've made in the past, and then looking to the future, just figuring out how we're going to make our marriage work. And they feel caught between those two things, and they feel stuck, and there's just this sense of like paralysis, and fear. And we were talking about this a little bit at staff meeting, and somebody brought up, Cassie said something about the difference between praying in fear and praying in faith. And it just was really powerful for me when I was thinking about what is the difference between when we offer up prayers that are based in fear, where we're kind of panicking and going, God help, God help, God help, versus when we're really praying in faith, believing what God's going to do and then seeing Him act. And there's a big difference in those two things. And there's a big difference in the results that we get in prayer. Sometimes people feel like, well, God doesn't answer my prayers. And partly it might be because you're praying in a panic mode rather than in faith. You're praying out of fear. And I want to talk to you today about the difference and use this story to really illustrate that difference. And the reason this story came up for me is because of this whole journey that we're on with the church and the facility situation that we're on, right? When about a couple months ago now, God put it on my heart to get 100 people to pray for a free place to meet for 2 years. And I thought it was crazy, but I'm like, okay, well, I do crazy things sometimes, so I'll pray for that. I'll get people to pray for that. And as soon as we got all the people praying for that, the guy called me from this building, and you guys know the rest of that story. Like, guy called me, and he said, that they were going to build it in about 2 years. And I'm like, 2 years? Oh, well, God told me to pray for a free place. Would you give it to us? He said, all right, maybe. Let me talk to my boss. And so he talked to the boss, and back and forth. Anyway, long story short, for $1,200 a month, basically the price of 2 of our offices upstairs, we get the whole place for free. And for about 2 years is when they're looking to build. So we're just kind of in this amazing place where we're going, God, you're amazing. You told us to pray for this, and then you gave it to us. And then we went and met with the city and put an initial plan together and told them what we wanted to do. And they were supportive, and they said, well, we'll do it, but we're only going to give you a temporary use permit, and only for 2 years. I'm like, yeah, well, God, yeah. And remember, and I was telling Pete, and Pete was saying, this never happens in my world, because Pete's our chairman, he's the project manager, he's an architect, and he's like, this never happens in my world. I said, well, welcome to my world. And then the next week, we went back to meet with the building official, and the building official, we were going to basically present our plan and show him what we wanted to do, but this guy, like, his job was to find holes in the plan, and to tell us what we needed to do to make it work. So, because his job is to protect the city and make sure they're not getting sued, make sure we're doing our stuff right. So he just starts poking holes in it. And we come away from that meeting a little bit discouraged, feeling like, man, that wasn't as positive as our last meeting. And all the guys that were so positive at the last meeting that said they're just going to sign off on it didn't show up to this meeting. And so this guy didn't even know how excited they were about it. And so we were kind of bummed, and then we had to go back and talk to the fire marshal, because he said, oh, you got to talk to the fire marshal because they need to get sprinklers. And the fire marshal wasn't much more encouraging. He just kind of put it back on the building official. And so we felt like, in the middle of this, we're stuck. And if they make us put sprinklers in the building, that could be a deal killer. Because the fire hydrants are across the street. you got to tunnel underneath the street and put water to the building and put in sprinklers. It's not just putting sprinklers in the building. It's like closing down Avery Parkway, closing down Marguerite Parkway. That's ridiculous. And if the other guys that run the traffic stuff knew that this guy was going to tell us to do that, I think they would have said it was ridiculous and we could have worked it out. All that to say, I was feeling kind of, stressed about that, feeling like praying, and I was starting to pray and kind of like feel like this little bit of panic, And other people started to say things like, oh no, you're kind of leading us, and you got us to this building, and then we did all this work, and now it's all going to be for nothing. And so people ask me questions like, so what, we're not going to be able to do it now? Or it's all for nothing, and all this work was for nothing? And I'm like, hold on now. This ain't over until the fat lady sings, And I don't see any fat lady singing yet. So we were talking about that, but it reminded me of this story. Now I'm going to tell you the rest of the parts of this story and can catch you up where we're at this point. But I'm going to leave it there for a minute because I want to introduce you to this story, because I think this story is a powerful picture of kind of where we've been and where we are as a church, but I think it's also a lot of where many people are in their personal lives, kind of stuck between an insurmountable obstacle ahead of us and some things in our past that are kind of coming after us. In the church world, the past things is the school district, and we actually have a meeting this week with the school district about this issue, because we told the school, we think you're charging us too much money, because they changed their agreement with us of how much they charge us, and basically our rent doubled in the this year, and it's part of what's been pushing a lot of looking for a place to move. And it's like $12,000 they're giving us bills for, and they're billing us wrong and some things. But when we talk to them about it, they're like, no, you got to pay us right now, or we might just not let you in the school. And so it was kind of like, okay, we're maybe burning a bridge on this side, and we may be having some obstacles on this side, and it just felt kind of scary, right? And some of you may have felt like that in your own lives, and I really think this story is for you, because it's for me, and it's ministering to me this week. And I learned some things about how to live in faith rather than in fear. So turn to Exodus 14, and I want to read this story with you. It's a story of Moses and the Israelites, and what happened after they left Egypt. They came out of Egypt. Remember, God had done all kinds of miraculous things against Pharaoh and against all of the gods of Egypt, plagues of, lice and boils, and plagues on their cattle, and plagues on their river, and all the things that they valued and that they worshipped. Basically, God did a full-on attack on all these things, and they ended up kicking the Israelites out, saying, "Get out of here, go!" Because God had told Moses, "Tell Pharaoh, let my people go." And Pharaoh said no at the beginning, but now he finally says go. So the people leave. And they come out, and they're headed into the promised land. And it was a promise, right, that God had made to them. God told Moses, "You're going to follow me. And you're going to go to Pharaoh, you're going to tell him to let my people go, and then I'm going to lead you out. I'm going to lead you into the promised land. The land I promised to give to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. The land of your forefathers. This land that's been there. And it's waiting for you." And they had God's promise on that, and so they started heading out and heading toward this promised land, and then all of a sudden, they came into some obstacles, and this is where we pick up the story. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-hahiroth between Migdal and the sea. There they are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-Zephon." Now you all know where those places are, right? It's this place along the Red Sea, at this part of the Red Sea that's like a finger that comes out. It's called the Sea of Reeds, which is an upper part of the Red Sea. And they're going to camp right there. And God knew the exact spot that he wanted them, because God knew some things about what's going on there. God knew exactly what he wanted to do. And listen to what it says. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. Who set the Israelites up to be in a bad situation? Tom? Okay. That's good. Who set the Israelites up to be in a bad situation? God, right? It was God who actually was orchestrating events. And he had a bigger plan that was bigger than just Israel, because this wasn't just about Israel. It was also about God displaying his glory and teaching Egypt a lesson, an important lesson, that I am the Lord. Okay? God wanted to do something with Egypt as well as with Israel. He had poured out all kinds of things on Egypt's gods and condemned them. But he says now, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart so that he'll chase after you. And I'm putting you out there as bait, because God is this master chess player. And he is putting them out there and saying, they're going to think you're wandering around, they're going to come after you, and you're going to be right on the edge of the sea, right at the one spot where if the wind blows a certain way, a hard east wind all night long, the sea will peel back and there's a rock and you can walk across. And God knew exactly where they needed to be, and God knew exactly what time he was going to put them there, and God knew exactly what he was doing. But the Israelites didn't know. See, because on our earthbound perspective, we don't always know what God's up to. And from our perspective, it just looks like things are really bad. And Israel's about to see that, and it's about to go from bad to worse, because they're not only, they left and they're camped on the sea, but now here come the Egyptians. Listen to what it says. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them. And they said, what have we done? We've let the Israelites go and we've lost their services. So he had his chariot made ready, and he took his army with him, and he took 600 of his best chariots, along with the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-Hahiroth, opposite Baal-Zephon. And as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. And they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here in the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die here in the desert. You ever felt like that? God, why did you bring me here? I thought you were leading me. I thought you were doing something good. But now here I am, and you got left me, and now they're coming after me, and now I'm just going to die out here. It would have been better if you would have left me alone. And I got some calls like that this last week. Oh, what did we do? You know, like, how did we get here, and now we're going to be kicked out of the school, and we're going to not have a place to meet, and what are we going to do? And there's this sense, and I think, and I see it happening in other people's lives too. I know somebody that, you know, they're in a place where they moved out of one house and they bought another house, but they can't get the money out of escrow. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's like all of these problems that just seem insurmountable. And what happens when the problems mount up and we get insurmountable and it feels impossible is we start to panic. And that's what the people did. They start to panic and they start to cry out to God. And it's a prayer that's not a prayer of faith. It's a prayer of panic. It's a prayer out of fear. Going, God help! God help! What am I going to do? Oh no! And we start to like move and do things. And it's like we're trying to do something. Have you ever been in that situation where you start to get afraid and your situation is scary and what's behind you, you can't go back and you can't go forward, and so you start to worry and then you start to move and you're making a lot of motion and you're doing a lot of stuff but nothing productive, right? Anybody ever been there? Okay. The Israelites were there at that point. And I love what Moses said to them. You know, he said basically, don't just do something, stand there. You know, don't just do something, stand there. Like, don't try to just think of something to do or cry out to God or worry. Listen to what Moses said. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. Now at this point, Moses didn't know what the deliverance was that the Lord would bring. But Moses was getting to know the Lord enough to know that if the Lord said he's going to lead him to the promised land, he's going to lead him to the promised land. A few different times, he gets him into this place where things look bad. He goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says no. So he brings some plagues, and Pharaoh says okay. And then Pharaoh changes his mind, and then he says no. And then he goes back and he more plagues. And then he says no. And then he wants to put more work on the people. And then the people complain. And then Moses goes back and puts more plague. And on this whole thing goes. But if God wants something done, you are stupid to stand in his way, right? If God is up to something, I pity the fool that stands in his way, as Mr. T would say. Right? Moses knew, look, stand firm. You'll see the deliverance of the Lord. I don't know how he's going to do it. I don't know what he's going to do. But you just chill out. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. Maybe some of you need to hear that today. Because you're in panic mode, you know? You're facing a financial challenge, something with your marriage, something with your kids, something from your past that's coming back to haunt you. Maybe you need to just hear that word from Moses today. Just stand still. Trust the Lord. He's going to deliver you. You just wait, you'll see. You just need to be still. He's going to fight for you. And I think some of the best advice that we could get sometimes when we start to get afraid is just be still. Remember who's with you. Remember who's with you. Now the Lord was with these people, right? In fact, he was with them, leading them as a pillar of fire by day and a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. So he could lead them, so he could guide them, so they could actually see his presence with them in a visible way. They could sense that his presence is with them. But just like us, they forget. They forget that God's the one that promised he was leading them. They forget all that God did in the past. And they get scared. And I know sometimes you do too. Sometimes I do too. It's all right. Moses says, stand firm, you'll see the deliverance of the Lord. And I love what the Lord says to Moses. This is great. The Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Who are we supposed to cry out to? But I think that's what God is saying, is there's a difference between crying out in fear and stepping out in faith. God had already told him he was leading them to the promised land. He told them what he was doing. And when they called on God in faith, God always showed up. When Moses raised his staff, God did things. And so God is expecting, look, Moses, sometimes you need to quit praying and start doing what I've already called you to do. There's a time to pray, and there's a time to act. And now is going to be a time to act, but praying in faith is different than just spinning in that fear. It says, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. Duh, Moses. Kind of reminds me of the time when Jesus asks the disciples, hey, do we have any food? You know, they say, we don't have any food. And he says, well, what do we have? A couple loaves, a couple fishes. Jesus says, okay, take them, feed everybody. It's like he almost expected the disciples to do it. I think he'd been training them. Maybe they hadn't caught on that they actually had the power to do things in his name, and, you know. Same thing with the sea. He's sleeping in the back of the boat, and he was kind of irritated when they woke him up. And so he gets up and he calms the storm. He says, you have no faith. Why didn't you do it? Any of you ever tried to calm a storm? I've tried. I think I might have got it once, but most of the time it doesn't work for me. But you don't know until you try, and the reality is God expects us to have faith and to trust him. And if we knew who the God is that's with us, we wouldn't get so panicked. We wouldn't get so afraid. God tells Moses, stretch out your staff and your hand over the sea and divide the water. And God's like calling the shots and making the plan. And so God says, I'll harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they go in after them. And I'll gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. See, this was about more than just Israel and their stuff. God was up to stuff with Pharaoh and his army. He had a little bit of payback time that he wanted to do with Pharaoh and his army. And he wanted to teach all the Egyptians a lesson. That there is one God who is supreme and has power. And that God is the God that these Israelites were following. And sometimes, things may be going bad in our life. And we may be scared, we may be in a bad spot. And it may be that you're right where God wants you because he's trying to use you to display his glory to somebody else. Maybe. could be. And it's good that we have the scripture to look at and gain a little bit of perspective on that. But look what happened. It says, then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and stood behind them, and coming between the armies of Israel and Egypt, so that throughout the night the cloud brought darkness to the Egyptian side and light to the Israel side. And so neither went near the other all night long. God was covering their back. And here's the thing. Sometimes if you think God's not with you because you don't see him in front anymore, you think he's left you, just turn around and look behind. He might be covering your back. And so then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, and he turned it into dry land. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Discovery Channel thing on that, or the History Channel thing. It's pretty cool. There's just kind of one spot, the Sea of Reeds, where that could actually, scientists have discovered that they could actually, if a wind came that was strong enough, it could actually blow the water up so that there's a strip of, like rock that people could walk through. And that's basically what's happening here. God had told them exactly where to camp, and then God blew the winds back and opened this thing up. The Discovery history people sometimes make it seem like, oh, it was just a coincidence, but it wouldn't have gotten written down as this great miracle. Coincidences don't happen right at the 11th hour when you need them, usually. But God seems to always show up at the 11th hour when we need him. Anybody notice that? Always at the last minute. That's why every movie is that way too, right? At the very last minute, just when you think all hope is gone, the hero shows up and something happens and changes and saves the day. Because it's God's story. It's how he works. It's what he does. He likes drama. The Egyptians pursued them, and all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. And during the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and the cloud at the Egyptian army, and he threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so they had difficulty driving, and the Egyptians said, let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Israel. So now it's the Egyptians' turn to kind of spin in that confusion. And when fear happens, and when you're in the grip of fear, you're not making good decisions. And the Israelites in the grip of fear weren't making good decisions, but thank God Moses is a good enough leader that he can calm them down and go, look, trust the Lord. Remember, the Lord's with us, and he's going to see us through this. But the Egyptians had nothing like that. They just started getting into confusion. They started getting afraid. They started panicking, creating more problems. The chariot wheels got jammed, and then God told Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen and the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. That's the other part that's miraculous about this that the History Channel people miss, right? Because sometimes they think, well, there was only a little bit of water, maybe it happened. Well, a little bit of water wouldn't have killed all the king's horsemen and all the king's men. Couldn't put Humpty Dumpty back together. The Lord swept them into the sea, but the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and left. And that day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. When the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. God used what was a very bad situation, that was a very scary situation, that the people would have rather not been in. He used it to bring glory to himself, to teach the whole Egyptian nation a lesson, as well as to rescue his people and give them even stronger faith in what he had done. It's just how God works. Sometimes he brings us through a trial and he does one good thing, but then it's so easy for us to forget, We forget the prayers that God answered, and we start to cry out, we start to panic, we start to think, oh no, what's going to happen? God, why did you leave me out here just so I could die in the desert? But look, God's led you this far. He's going to keep leading you through. And the God who promised to set up leading you to a promised land, he keeps his promises. And he'll see us through. as I said, there's a lot of people that I know are going through stuff. And you got problems coming up, maybe from behind, like your past. Maybe some bad decisions you made in the past that it's haunting you now. You've got regret. Maybe stuff with your kids that you've done or you failed to do at the right time, and now you're in a stuck place. And you've got some insurmountable obstacles in the future. Like, I don't know what it is for you. But what I do know is this, and this is the message that I think God wants to say to you, that He was speaking to me this week. And I'll put it up here on the board. I'm going to let you read it. When you're haunted by the past and daunted by the future, remember His presence. When you're haunted by the past and daunted by the future, remember His presence. Here's what I mean. These people had the Egyptians coming up. They had done some things to the Egyptians. You know, on their way out, they pretty much plundered the Egyptians. And their past was coming back to haunt them. I mean, Moses' past, if you want to just think about his story, when God had come to Moses, remember at the burning bush, why was Moses out there tending flocks of sheep? Because Moses was on the run. He was a wanted man. He had left Egypt. If you remember, Moses actually grew up in Pharaoh's household. He was raised by Pharaoh's daughter as her son, because all the Egyptians were killing all the babies and making the Israelites throw their babies out to exposure to die because they didn't want more Israelites that were going to rise up against them. It was a political move. And so Moses' mom had hid him in a basket, and Pharaoh's daughter had found him and took pity on him and adopted him as her own daughter. And he grew up in Pharaoh's own house, was raised with the one who would be king as his brother. Grows up in this house, and then when he gets a little bit older, he starts feeling for his own people, the Israelites, because he knows that he's one of them. And so he sees an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite, and he kills the Egyptian. And then he buries the body. And then he has to go run for his life because Pharaoh's out to get him. He's a wanted man. He's wanted for murder. And so he has to run for his life. And he's got that past haunting him. And so when God comes to him and God says, Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. Moses says, no, you got the wrong guy. I can't go to Pharaoh. Of all people in the world, I can't go to Pharaoh. I'm a wanted man. I'd be a dead man. I mean, not only do I have to go back where I'm a wanted man, but there's a whole bunch of family baggage with that. I haven't been heard from in 40 years. I cannot go to Pharaoh. And God says this. God says, I will go with you. I'll go with you. See, because God's presence makes all the difference. If God's going with you, you can't go to Pharaoh. Because God will give you words to speak. If God goes with you, God will do miracles through you. When you throw your staff down, it'll become a snake. When you put it over the sea, it'll part the sea. You'll be able to do amazing things because God is with you. And when I lead my people out of the land of Egypt, I will go with them. And I'll be as a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. And I will go with them, and I'll be with them, and I'll be their God, and they'll be my people, and we'll be together. I'll be with you. You don't have to be afraid. I'll guide you, and that pillar would move, and they would follow. I'll protect you. The pillar goes around behind him to protect him from the Egyptians. God's presence. That's all we need. See, the beauty is, if God's with you, you don't have to be afraid. If you're haunted by your past, you remember that God was with you. You can be healed from it. I spent the last couple of days with Dr. Kraft. We had a seminar yesterday at the old Rover building. And about 38 people came, and it was kind of our first real gathering there, which was really kind of exciting and fun. But Dr. Kraft does work with people in inner, deep healing of just the painful things in our life. Like if you've had painful experiences, like if people were abused or neglected, or they just have bad memories from when they were a child that have affected you. In order to undo those things, we got to bring some healing. The way that Dr. Kraft does this, and I sat through 4 sessions with him doing it on Friday with some people, is he helps people just go back and just remember all through their life how God was with them and what that experience of that. Because see, we know theologically God is with us. You know, we know it theoretically. We read the scriptures that say, you know, I'll go with you. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the Lord is with me. We read Psalm 139 where it says, you were there when I was formed in the secret place. There was no part of me that was ever hid from you. And if I go to the depths of the sea, you're there. If I go to the farthest ocean, you're there. If I go to hell and back, you're there. You're going to be with me. There's nowhere I can go to flee from your presence. God is always with me. We know it theoretically. We don't always know it experientially. We sing songs about how we'll know He'll never let go through the calm, through the storm, or nothing can separate us from His love. But in those moments that we panic and we get afraid, we don't always feel it. And even the Israelites, as they saw the Egyptians coming and as they saw the sea before them, they start to panic and they forget God is right there with them, right? The creator of the universe, the one who had just done all those plagues in Egypt, how quickly they forget. And we think to ourselves, if I had a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day, I wouldn't forget. But yet, if they were to look at us, they would go, oh my gosh, you have a Bible. If we had the Bible, if we knew all these stories about God and what He had done in the past, and we had all His words where He spoke to us, then, we would never doubt. See? Everybody always thinks the other people have it better. Oh, if Jesus was only with us, as like the disciples. Yeah, it worked really well for them, huh? Like the reality is, faith is believing what we don't see. And even when you can see a pillar of cloud, or you've got to see a Bible, or you can see Jesus Himself standing there in person, still we lack faith. We panic and we act out of fear and we cry out in fear rather than in faith. And God says, I want you to have faith and I want you to move on. Because my presence is with you. And when we met with Dr. Kraft and some of the work that we did, is we take people back to remember these examples and these stories in their life where good things happen or where bad things happen, but to visually see the truth that we know intellectually. Just visualize it, use our imagination. And the reason he does that is because he did some work in memory, and he said, the memory people tell us that our memories are stored 2 different ways, and there's linear memory, which is mostly what we do in school, of where we put things together, like words, and we think about things and make connections through words. But the episodes of our life, our memories of what happens to us, are all recorded in visual memory. It's called episodic memory. It's like you have a snapshot in your mind that you remember those things visually. And the problem is the Bible gives us words and we know the truth in words, but we don't always get it down to the level of our experience to experience it because we don't see it in pictures. Which is why Jesus taught most of the time in pictures, right? He told stories so you could picture God in a story. Because then it bypasses that linear part and connects to our heart. The same thing we did here. But when you're haunted by the past, you remember His presence. When you think about those things that you regret in your past, or those things that have happened to you that were traumatic, the way that you can begin to be healed from those things is to see where Jesus was in it. To go to that place with Jesus and to ask, Jesus, where were you in this? And it was so interesting to watch, because as people are going through this experience, and I've been through it myself, to be able to look for Jesus, sometimes they don't see Him. And it's interesting because He'll say, okay, imagine that place where you were, and you see Jesus there. I'll say, no. I'll say, well, look behind you. I'll go, oh, there it is. And it's like, I don't know why, but maybe it's just like in this story. Sometimes He's covering your back. And And maybe what you didn't think when you were in that situation, when you were there at 7 years old or at 8 years old or at 10 years old, in your memory of that situation, you didn't know Jesus then, and you don't even know that he was there with you then. But you know now, so you're going to re-educate yourself to bring healing to that place and to replace fear with faith because you trust Jesus. And people get some pretty amazing healing. And it was really, really cool to be part of. But the point is this. It works in our present situation. It works in the past. It works in the future. If you've got things that you're facing in the future, if you got stuff coming up that's so daunting you don't even know what to do and you're just starting to spin in that fear thing, close your eyes, picture that future, and remember Jesus is there with you. He's not letting you go. He promised us, never will I leave you or never will I forsake you. He said, there's nowhere you can go to get away from my presence. And he said, Paul said in Romans 8, neither height nor depth nor angels or demons or things in the present or things in the future. Nothing in all creation can separate us from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing. So you need to remember that truth. You need to remind yourself of that truth. When you start to get afraid, you got to remember he's with you. You got to stand firm. And in that moment, remember his presence. That's what these people had to do. And it worked. He got them through it. Now, he's going to get us through it too. Whatever your situation, he's going to get you through it. The situation with the church, he's going to get us through it. We had a great meeting this last week. We met with a bunch of people that do construction and fire and a bunch of different things to try to figure out a plan of how to, get around the fire sprinkler issue. And there's some great ways to do it. There's about 3 different ways that we can pull it off to get around that issue because there's just technical things. I won't bore you with the details. But we're putting together a plan and meeting with these people later this week, Thursday or Friday. I'm not sure yet. And I want you to be praying about that. And not praying in fear like, oh no, God, what's going to happen? But like praying in faith. Because God led us this far. And we know that God wanted us in this place. He's the one that set up the whole thing with pray for a free place. That ridiculous thing. God is the one who said that and then did it. God's the one that's led it this far, so he's going to see it through, right? So we just got to have faith. We got to trust him, and we got to, like the people, move on, present our plan, and trust him. He's going to do it. So pray for that, and we're going to move on and do that. We also have a meeting with the school district on Tuesday. We're going to meet with them, and we're going to negotiate some things there. And so you can be praying for that. Pray that God would lead that God would guide that God would, drown them at the bottom of the sea. No, just kidding. Just kidding. No, but God will see us through, and God can go before us, and we got to go in faith. And whatever you're facing, whatever your thing is, wherever you're stuck in the middle of it, remember his presence. If you're haunted by the past or haunted by the future, remember his presence. Just return to it. I love Jesus calling, and some of you read this, and I just want to read to you a quote from that because it's just been so good for me. It was right along the lines of this stuff. It was yesterday. And this is what Jesus calling wrote. But basically, it's this devotional. It's written as if it's Jesus speaking to you. And it says this: I want you to know how safe and secure you are in my presence. This is a fact, totally independent of your feelings. You are on your way to heaven, to the promised land. Nothing can prevent you from reaching that destination. Nothing. Even if you get killed, you just get there faster. There, you will see me face to face, and your joy will be off the charts by any earthly standards. Even now, you are never separated from me, though you must see me through the eyes of faith. I will walk with you to the end of time and onward into eternity. Although my presence is a guaranteed promise, that does not necessarily change your feelings. When you forget that I'm with you, you may experience loneliness or fear. It is through awareness of my presence that peace displaces the negative feelings. Practice the discipline of walking consciously with me through each day. exactly what I'm talking about. Practicing that presence. You look back and you get afraid. You look forward, you get afraid. Just remember His presence. Remember He's with you and step out in faith. Why don't you close your eyes and just pray with me? And as we close this out, I just want you to just bring to your mind's eye, just imagine the situation you're facing. Because every one of us has got something. Problems from your past or something in your future or both. Maybe it's a picture of something with your house or with your marriage or your kids, I don't know. But just picture it, whatever your situation is. And Jesus, I just invite you to show yourself to us in that situation. Just look around. Look around and see, where is Jesus? What's the look on His face? Does He look worried? Does He look like He's afraid? What does He look like? Jesus, would you speak to these your people and tell them what you want to say to them? Just listen silently to Jesus. See Him in that place and listen. Jesus, I just ask now that you would just walk toward each of these people and you would give them a big hug. Would you just let Jesus give you a big hug? Just experience His presence. You know He's here. You know He loves you. Let your heart experience it. Jesus, just give them a big hug. We just ask, Jesus, that you would lead and guide each of us. Give us the faith to trust you. Give us the eyes to see the invisible, that you are with us, that you go before us, that you cover our back. Set us free from the fear, the doubt, the worry, by the power of your presence. Even as we go from here, you go with us. And everything we face tomorrow, we face with you. Love you, Lord. So would you stand with us as we close with this song?